Hello guys, what I'm going to do today is show you how to create a quick cycling animation, and it will just touch upon the basics of the animation palette, and down here also the keyframe controls. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load in this little snowman from the library, and I'm just going to make it do a 360 rotation. So down at the bottom, this shows me keyframes. So animation in Poser, like pretty much all animation programs, 3D animation programs, uses a system that's known as keyframes and tweens. Basically, this playhead here shows the current frame. We have frame 1 of 30 frames. So 30 frames in American TV standards is 1 second of animation. In the UK and Europe, it would be 25 frames because our TV plays at 25 frames a second. So if I click here to go to the last frame, over on here is the keyframes control. And if I do add keyframe, it will make the last frame, or the current frame rather, into a keyframe. And that means that whatever I put in that frame, the program will try to morph from the previous keyframe, in this case the first frame. And we can see that. In fact, I'll just do something before I show you the animation palette. So what I want to do is I want to take this snowman, select his body, and I'm just going to do a 360-degree rotation. So I'll just type in 360 here, just clicked on the numbers there, and now I type 360, and nothing apparently changes. But if I now grab this slider, you can see that in actual fact, as I scrub through the timeline, he's doing a 360 rotation. And now if I open the animation palette, we can see that depicted on the palette. What we have here is the figure snowman. We have frame number 1, see the frame numbers are at the top here. And we have frame number 30. And what it's done is it's used what's known as a spline tweening method. And we can see that because this frame is a keyframe, it shows up as green. This frame is a keyframe, it shows up as green. And then these frames in between are tweens, they show up as pale green. And that means that it uses this spline interpolation method. Interpolation is the method that Poser uses to calculate the tween frames, or the in-between frames. So it saves me having to work out here exactly. So I could just go to, I could just go to the next frame here and manually put in a keyframe here, and then the next frame, and manually do a keyframe there. But that would be awfully tedious, especially with complex multi-layer animations. So what I just do is I do the first frame, the last frame, and Poser calculates the movements in between. It's not perfect, especially if you have a slightly erratic movement, like say, I don't know, something where the movement between the two positions is not linear. So back to our animation palette here, we have, as I say, we have spline interpolation between the two. And what spline interpolation means is that it basically does what's known as easing. So it goes from static here to static at the end, but here it goes, it does the movement slower, faster, 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 full speed, slow, 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 back to here. So it's a nice smooth gradient from one place to another. To change that, what I do is I click on this to open, and then I choose the parts that I want to change. So in this case, I've rotated the hip, I think, but you can see there it's highlighted. But I could just grab here and do the whole lot. And then I'm going to change to a linear section, and now that will mean all of these frames up to here will now use the linear section mode, and then the last mode is constant section. I'll refer to that later on. You see the figure has various parts to it. It has body, hip, chest, same as a normal human being. And I could choose to animate just the body part here or any other part in this animation palette. But for now, we'll just leave it there, move that off. So what I've done is I've created a 360 rotation around the vertical axis. So it's just going to spin around here. And if I press play here to preview it, because this animation is quite simple, it shows every single frame of the animation. But when the scene gets more complicated, it'll start cutting frames out, and then it won't play every single frame. So what you have to do is to go up here and turn off this skip frames option, and then it'll play every frame, but it'll be really slow. So what we're going to do, we're going to export that now as an animation. So we do make movie and set whatever settings you want here. So for now, I'm just leaving it on MPEG-4, full size movie. Just the screen is set to 640 by 480, and it's going to automatically make the movie. And you may recall from an earlier video I made that it actually exports a series of individual frames and then compiles them together at the end. And although this is poor for practice, I'm going to leave it to delete frames after encoding. The reason it's poor practice is that if your computer crashes or something happens halfway through, this means that you have to re-render the entire animation every time. Now, because we're using the preview renderer, which is denoted somewhere. Oh, here, sorry, that took a long time. So here, so we're using a preview renderer, but I could choose to do the Firefly renderer or the Superfly renderer, for example, or even the sketch renderer, which I did for the animation at the start of this, of all my videos, the running woman. But these can often take minutes per frame. So in which case, if you get an error here, you don't want to lose all of the previous renders you've done, but I'm using preview now because it's much quicker. So I've set where it's going. I'm just going to set the name for it, so I'll call it Snowman. I'm walking in the air. And I'm now just going to render that sequence. And that beautiful piece of singing was a bonus. And this is why we use a preview renderer. 30 frames takes no time. And now you'll see here, there's the animation of my snowman. So I've done a 360-degree rotation, and the very last frame is the same as the first frame. Now, if you want a continuing loop animation, that's not actually the way to do it. It doesn't show up on this, but I'll show you in a minute a situation where it does show up, because you don't want a duplication of frames, because what you'll do is you'll get an animation here that goes from 0 degrees, so that's straight on, then it does 360-degree rotation back to 0, and then as it loops around you get 2 frames that are exactly head on. So what you actually want to do is allow for that, and I'll demonstrate that now with a different animation. So I'm just going to get a primitive in here, and I'm going to pull a cylinder into the scene, which is, make sure I'm in frame 1, and this cylinder is here. Now, so long as I don't start making changes later on along the timeline, whatever I do in frame 1 continues in that same position or that same value throughout the whole animation. So you'll see here on my animation palette, the cylinder that I just brought in just has 1 keyframe at the start, and that's it. Now, if I go to the end now, in fact, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that more of a tall cylinder so it's more obvious. And this is going to pivot around this point here. And what I want to do is I want to do a 360 rotation, and I'm just going to make the background invisible, the ground invisible, because it tricks your eye into thinking this is doing weird stuff. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the last frame here by clicking the end frame button, and I'm going to do a 360 rotation on this. So let me see, it's X, I believe. Yep, 360 and X. Oops, a daisy. Fingers are all over the place. And you'll see that that has automatically added a keyframe at the end of my animation palette. And you need to be careful when you start doing that, adding keyframes automatically. They'll mess up your tween sometimes where you didn't want keyframes added. You might have to manually select the add keyframe button. It gets confusing sometimes. So now what I have, as I scrub through this, I'll go back to the beginning. This pivots in that direction. So remembering what I said about changes that you apply to the first frame apply to everything unless you put keyframes in somewhere else along the timeline to interrupt that. I'm going to move the camera. Yes, it applies to cameras and lights as well. And this on frame 1, this is the tallest this is going to be. So I just need to make sure that that can animate there a little bit off the bottom of the screen there. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit more. And now when I scrub through or play that, you'll see that rotates naturally. But what I've done is the last frame I've set to 360. So now if I make that animation, and that's still called Snowman, so it will overwrite it. So let's call that Snowman 2, or yeah, Snowman 2. Render that. And you'll see that, and you see there's a little stutter just as it comes back to the top there. But the bigger the motion, the more obvious that effect becomes. So here's the solution to that. So this obviously is a very, very simple animation. It's really great for doing things like logos or, you know, just stuff like that, where the individual parts don't need to do too much, but you just want to create a little bit of interest. So what I do, I take the amount of movement and I divide it by the number of frames. So in this case, I'm rotating is 360. I divide it by 30 frames, which gives me what, 13 per frame, 13 degrees per frame. So that's how much it's moving. Then I go to the last frame, and rather than doing 360, I take 13 off that, 347. So what that now does is when that returns, the first frame is then 13 degrees further than the last frame. So it becomes a bit more complicated when you're doing things like, say, a bounce across the screen. You have to work out the distance it's travelled, divided by the number of frames. And it becomes really complicated if you're doing things with human movement. But this is just a really basic principle. And again, I'm going to render that animation. You're probably not going to see it because it's so fast anyway and so small. And I'm just going to change that to Snowman 3. I won't subject you to another example of my award-winning singing. And this automatically animates with the default video player, which in my case is K-Lite Media Player, which I think is the best player. And I don't know if you can see, but that's just a little tiny bit smoother as it hits that 0 point again. And we've got a nice animation there. So supposing I did want that to be a high quality animation, there's a couple of ways I can do it, but the easy way is just to go into my normal render settings. I set the dimensions here and I go into my render settings. I do most of my rendering in Superfly. In fact, I do all of it in Superfly. So I set my preset here. So I'd go, say, Optics High, and then I'll go into Animation, Make Movie, and this time I would just change to my Superfly renderer, and it picks up the Superfly quality settings there and the size and all of that kind of stuff. And then when you come to the final render, you can set the video quality according to how high you need it. If it's a video output, I would do very high quality if it was for the screen, or if it's going on YouTube where it's going to be compressed anyway, maybe 70s is high enough. And there you go, guys. So it's just a very quick overview of animation. There's a whole lot more that happens when you start animating layers upon layers. Supposing you had a running figure and you have to animate the torso of the figure and the legs and the toes and the hands and the breathing chest and the mouth expressions and all of that. And they have layers upon layers. So, for example, the first thing you might do is animate the torso going across the screen to get a smooth distance there, a smooth movement. Then you animate the arm pumping back and forwards off the torso. Then you might animate the fingers on the arm. So you're working out this hierarchy of animation, and that can become quite time consuming. I hope you found that useful, and I will speak to you again soon. Take care, guys.